Hey guys, today we're in the book of 1 Kings chapter 3. We open up with Solomon is now the king, and one of the first things he does here is he makes a peace treaty, a marriage alliance with Egypt. And so he marries one of the Pharaoh's daughters. We don't know exactly which Pharaoh. We probably have it down to the 21st dynasty, but we're not for sure exactly who. Now, we don't learn this until later, but in Chronicles, we'll learn that Solomon married a lot of women, and a lot of women came from a lot of different countries. And so this was very common back in those days, so that he would marry other countries, daughters of kings or rulers of other countries. And so that would, in fact, be a peace treaty. No father wants to go and invade and kill the kingdom in which his daughter sits as queen, right? So here he does this with Egypt from the very beginning, which is, of course, a big country. With a big army, right? So he's smart in that. But notice it says he brings her into the city of David. Now this isn't a sin, but it's not smart, right? He brings her into Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, he's building not only his palace, but he's building the palace for God. He's building the temple. He's doing a lot of things. And we will see in Chronicles that all of these wives, they want their own temples and palaces, their own gods, to have places to worship. And this becomes the ultimate downfall of Solomon. And so he brings her in, but notice verse 2, the people were sacrificing at high places. Remember, Solomon allows these high places. He allows altars to be built, but let me give a preface. He gives permission to build high places, but they are high places for God, for Yahweh, right? But remember, even though that's good, it is forbidden, right? God said to only worship him at the temple, at the tabernacle. And so here, Solomon is like, well, it takes a long ways to travel. I want to give people, so he makes a bunch of places to worship, but they are worshiping Yahweh. So it's good and it's bad. And we see verse 3, Solomon loved the Lord, only he sacrificed and made offerings at high places. Notice how it says this. He says, he loved the Lord, but he didn't do exactly what the Lord said. He sacrificed at high places and other places that were forbidden. So he loved the Lord, but he necessarily didn't follow the word of the Lord. Okay, so that's kind of the beginning of the end for Solomon. We see in verse 5 that he goes to Gibeon, and Gibeon is the place where the tabernacle is at. And so he goes to there, he sacrifices 1,000 sacrifices, and that night he has a dream, a vision. God comes to him in this dream, and God says, what shall I give you? Now, God is saying to Solomon that he is good, he has a right heart, he is the line of David, he's doing the right things, though he's not doing everything perfect. God is looking at his heart and he says, hey, you're doing well. What do you want me to give you, right? What can I give you? And so Solomon thinks, and he doesn't ask for anything of himself, but he asks for an understanding mind so that he can discern between good and evil. He's asking for knowledge, right? He understands as a king, an earthly king of God's people under God's providence, that he needs to be able to understand what is good and bad, what is godly and what is not as godly. So that's what he asked for God. And this pleased the Lord, right? Verse 10, this is a good thing. He didn't ask for self-riches. He asked for something that would move the kingdom of God further. And because the Lord was pleased in that, the Lord said, okay, I'll do this, but I'm also going to give you riches and honor, and I will lengthen your days. I will give you a long time to live. But notice what he says in verse 14. If, it's a big word, if you walk in my ways, you keep my statutes, you keep my commandments, right? And so he says, I'm going to give you all this if you walk in my ways, if you obey the word of the Lord. Solomon woke up. He realized it was a dream, but it meant something because he got up and man, he just starts to sacrifice like none other. It was a dream, but he knew the Lord was telling him something. And then we instantly go to a very famous story that a lot of people know about, but it shows the wisdom that God gave Solomon. It starts out in verse 16. It says, 2 prostitutes. Now, normally no king of any nation would hear prostitutes, right? Remember that when people had problems, they went to the gates. At those gates, there were elders. There was a line of people, right? And then after that, there would be another line of elders. And eventually, if there was a problem that could not be fixed or secured, then it would make to the king. The king was kind of like the Supreme Court of our days, right? But here we just see 2 common prostitutes, which were the worst of the worst. They stand before the king. So that just tells us something about the heart of Solomon, that he wanted to help all people, right? So it gives us a picture that Solomon is a good guy. And so these 2 prostitutes come and basically they say, hey, her baby died, my baby lives, they stole. And so they're arguing, who is this baby? And really, there's nobody in the house. There's no way to prove this. It's the word of 2 prostitutes. There's no way to definitively say whose baby it is. But because Solomon has been blessed by God, we see his wisdom. He tells his servants to get a sword, and he says, hey, I'm going to cut the baby in half. One mother says, absolutely not. Give the baby to her. There's no way I can see this baby cut apart. The other mom says, that's fine. Cut them in half. At least we both get equal, right? And so it was all a plan of Solomon because this showed who truly loved the child, which showed who truly was the mother, right? Her heart yearned for her son, and only a true mom would do that. And so he tells his servants that is the real mom. And the most important part of the story is the last verse, 28. And all of Israel heard of this judgment that the king had rendered, and they stood in awe of the king, right? And the king would have made hundreds, if not thousands, of decisions every single day, but it was this decision that was so above everything else that it spread throughout all of Israel, right? This was groundbreaking. This was an amazing feat in the eyes of Israel of how wise and how smart Solomon was. And this spread throughout all of Israel, and it brought awe to Israel. That word awe, phobos, is the word fear. It brought fear to Israel. They instantly saw that Solomon was God's man. God has truly blessed Solomon, and he has a supernatural, if you will, power. And Israel instantly saw Solomon and God in a different light. And they saw that because he perceived wisdom of God and how to do justice. And so this sets Israel on a stage to look at Solomon not just as their king, but as a person, an intermediary between God and them, right? So the king, they look at the king as another level, but this just took him to another level. And so this should set a precedence on how Israel will follow Solomon. But we'll have to continue to read to see if Israel will continue to follow that precedence. Hope that makes a little bit more sense, and we'll see you tomorrow in chapter 4. God bless.